At my sister's wedding, in front of 300 guests, she took the microphone and announced that I was proof of what happens to a woman no man could ever want. My mother stood up right beside her and raised her glass to toast my failure. The room laughed. I didn't say a single word. I just sat there, holding my son's hand under the tablecloth, and let them enjoy their moment. Because I already knew something none of them did. And in less than 10 minutes, the groom himself was going to be the one who destroyed them, not me. By the end of that night, my family would learn that the daughter they'd spent years underestimating had been quietly protected by someone they never suspected was paying attention at all. This is that story. My name is Ren. I was 31 years old, working double shifts as a labor and delivery nurse at a hospital in Charlotte, and raising my 5-year-old son, Reese, mostly on my own. My dress that night was 2 years old. I'd steamed it in the hotel bathroom myself because I couldn't afford the dry cleaner near the venue, and I'd redone my own hair in the car using the rearview mirror as a guide. 2 weeks before the wedding, my sister Presley called me with a list of instructions instead of an invitation. Don't wear white, obviously. Don't wear anything that draws attention. And please, for once, don't make the day about your situation. My situation. That's what my family called it. Not a divorce. Not a 5-year-old boy with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. A situation, like it was weather, like it would pass if I just waited it out quietly enough. Reese's father left when our son was 18 months old. He didn't leave for another woman or a better job in another city. He left because he decided out loud that fatherhood wasn't the life he'd signed up for. I found out he was gone the same week I found out our apartment lease was in my name only, and that the savings account we'd shared had been emptied down to $11. When I told my mother, Corinne, she didn't ask if I was okay. She asked what I'd done to drive him away, and then reminded me that she'd warned me about marrying young. In our house growing up, there were always 2 kinds of daughters. Presley was the daughter who got the good haircuts, the summer trips to the coast, the encouragement to dream big and chase whatever she wanted. I was the daughter who got told I was strong. It took me years to understand that being called strong in my family was just a polite way of saying no one was ever going to help me, and that I wasn't supposed to ask. I remember being 12 years old and hearing my mother tell a neighbor that Presley was the sensitive one who needed extra care, while I was built different, tougher. I didn't feel tough. I felt invisible. But invisible children learn to be useful instead, so I became the one who watched Presley after school, who covered for her when she snuck out, who never once got thanked for any of it. There was a specific afternoon, years later, that I've never fully been able to shake. I was 17, finishing my last year of high school, and a guidance counselor pulled me aside to ask why I hadn't followed up on an out-of-state nursing program she remembered helping me apply to, one with a scholarship attached. I told her I must have missed the deadline. I didn't think about it again for a long time. I had no reason to believe anyone in my own house would have interfered with something that far outside their notice. By the time I got into nursing school on my own, through community college transfer credits and 3 part-time jobs, I had mostly stopped expecting my family to notice the effort behind it. My mother attended my pinning ceremony for exactly 11 minutes before leaving early for one of Presley's dance recitals across town. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that about a lot of things. Presley's fiancé was a man named Ellison. He worked as an attorney specializing in family law, the kind of lawyer who genuinely cared about outcomes for kids, not just billable hours. I met him for the first time at a backyard barbecue the summer before the wedding, and instead of giving me the usual tight, uncomfortable smile people gave a single mother, he crouched down to Reese's level and asked him what his favorite dinosaur was. They talked about the T-Rex's tiny arms for almost 15 minutes while the rest of the adults ignored us both near the drink cooler. Later that same afternoon, I noticed Ellison quietly asking my mother a few questions about our grandmother, who had passed away when I was in nursing school. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed it was ordinary conversation, the kind future in-laws make to fill silence. I remember thinking quietly that my sister had found someone kind, someone different from the men our family usually approved of. I remember hoping that kindness would eventually rub off on the rest of them. I was wrong about the timeline. But I wasn't wrong about Ellison. The night before the wedding, there was a small rehearsal dinner at a private room in a downtown restaurant. I wasn't officially invited, but Ellison had insisted, over my mother's objections, that Reese and I come since Reese was technically listed as a junior usher. My mother sat me at the far end of the table, past the cousins, past even the wedding planner's assistant. When the servers began pouring wine for toasts, I noticed my mother lean toward Presley and whisper something, glancing briefly in my direction. Presley smiled the tight, practiced smile she always wore when she was about to do something she didn't want witnesses to remember clearly. During her toast that night, Presley thanked our parents, thanked Ellison's family, and then added, almost as an afterthought, "And I want to thank my sister Wren, for reminding me my whole life what happens when you don't plan things out properly." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the room. I smiled anyway, because Reese was sitting beside me, and I didn't want him to see anything other than his mother handling it with grace. Later, in the parking lot, my mother caught up with me while I was buckling Reese into his car seat. "Tomorrow, please don't wear anything flashy," she said. "And maybe keep him closer to your table. People will ask questions if he wanders." "He's 5, I said. "He's allowed to be curious." "You know what I mean, Wren." She glanced toward the restaurant, toward the warm light and laughter still spilling out the windows. "Tomorrow isn't about you." I didn't argue. I never did. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with my mother only gave her more material to use later. The venue was a restored estate outside the city, the kind of place with fountains in the entryway and staff who refilled your water glass before you noticed it was empty. Reese wore a small navy suit that I'd bought secondhand and tailored myself, staying up 2 nights in a row to get the sleeves right. He kept smoothing down his jacket in the car, asking if he looked fancy enough for Aunt Presley. He looked perfect. He always did. When we arrived, my mother met us at the door, not with a hug, but with a hand already extended toward the back of the room. "You're at table 14, she said. "Near the kitchen. It'll be easier for you to get Reese out quickly if he gets fussy." Reese wasn't a fussy child. He was, if anything, unusually patient for a 5-year-old, the kind of patient that comes from growing up watching his mother work long shifts and learning to entertain himself quietly. But table 14 wasn't about him. It was about making sure the situation stayed out of the photographs and out of easy view of the more important guests. During the family portraits, I walked Reese up toward the group, thinking that surely, on this one day, we'd be included. My mother stepped directly into my path before we reached the photographer. "Immediate family only for this set," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I am immediate family," I said. "Don't make this difficult, Wren." Her voice stayed pleasant, the way it always did when she wanted witnesses nearby to think she was being reasonable. "You'll get your turn later." We didn't get a turn. We went back to table 14, and Reese looked up at me with the particular confusion only a child can manage, the kind that hasn't yet learned to hide disappointment behind a neutral face. "Are we not family today?" he asked. "We're family every day," I told him, smoothing his hair back. "Some days just look different than others." It was the kind of answer you give a child when you don't have the heart to give him the real one. Dinner service was almost finished when the wedding planner tapped the microphone and announced that the bride wanted to say a few words before the cake was cut. Presley stepped onto the small stage in her second dress of the evening, a sleek ivory gown that caught the light every time she moved. She thanked the guests, thanked our parents, thanked Ellison's family. Then her eyes swept the room and landed on me at table 14. "I actually want to take a moment," she said, smiling into the microphone, "to talk about my sister." My stomach dropped before she said another word. "Wren, stand up for a second. Everyone should see you." Every head at every table turned. Reese pressed his small hand tighter around mine under the tablecloth, sensing, the way children do, that something was wrong before he understood why. "My sister has taught me so much," Presley continued, her voice bright and performative, carrying easily through the microphone. About what happens when you make the wrong choices early in life. She got married too young, to the wrong man, and now she's raising a little boy completely on her own. No husband, no plan, no backup. Honestly, I don't know how she does it, because I know I never could survive ending up like that. A ripple of laughter moved through the room, uncertain at first, then louder as guests realized they were being invited to laugh along without consequence. My mother rose from the head table, champagne glass in hand, her expression bright with a kind of pride I'd never once seen directed at me. "My oldest daughter has always been the difficult one," she said, loud enough to carry to every corner of the ballroom. "So let's raise a glass to Presley, for turning out nothing like her sister." The laughter grew louder still. Reese looked up at me, his eyes filling with tears he didn't understand yet. "Mommy, why is everyone laughing?" I couldn't answer him. My throat had closed around every word I might have said, and my hands had gone cold around his small fingers. I want to be honest about that moment, because it's the part people ask me about most. I wasn't thinking about my own dignity or how I looked to 300 strangers in expensive suits. I was thinking about my son, sitting beside a room full of laughing adults, learning in real time that his mother could be humiliated in public and no one would step in to stop it. I thought that was the worst moment of the night. I was wrong. Ellison stood up from the head table. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply rose, straightened his jacket, and walked, unhurried, across the dance floor while the laughter slowly died out, guests confused by the sight of the groom approaching the stage during his own wife's toast. He reached out and took the microphone from Presley's hand, gently but without asking permission. The room went silent in a way I had never heard a room go silent before, a silence with weight to it. "I'd like to say something too," Ellison said. "About family, and about what it should actually look like." Presley's smile faltered. My mother slowly lowered her glass, her knuckles tightening around the stem. "3 months ago," Ellison began, his tone calm and even, "I asked my future mother-in-law for basic paperwork on the family's financial history, because I wanted to set up a trust for our future children and needed my firm's forensic accountant to structure it properly. Corinne, you remember that conversation? You were the one who handed me the folder yourself." My mother's face went pale under the string lights. "While our accountant was reviewing those records," Ellison continued, "she noticed a reference to an older custodial account, one that wasn't part of anything we'd asked for. Out of due diligence, I called Wren directly, without mentioning why, and asked for her written authorization to request the archived records. She signed it without knowing what it was for. That authorization is what let us pull the full history." I froze at table 14, remembering the strange, unremarkable form Ellison had asked me to sign weeks earlier, one I'd assumed was routine wedding paperwork. What we found was a custodial account opened 11 years ago, in Wren's name, funded by our grandmother before she passed, specifically earmarked for nursing school. "It was worth almost $40,000 at the time it was opened," Ellison said. "When I asked why Wren had never received it, I was told the funds had already been distributed to her directly years ago." He looked, for the first time, directly at my mother. "They weren't." I checked the disbursement records myself, twice, because I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Every withdrawal was authorized by the person acting as the account's custodian. That person was you, Corinne. Over 4 years, that money paid for 2 years of Presley's private tuition, a semester abroad, and a meaningful portion of tonight's wedding. The silence in the room had a texture to it now, heavy and disbelieving, 300 people suddenly recalculating everything they thought they knew about the family in front of them. "Wren worked double shifts through nursing school," Ellison continued, his voice steady, not cruel, simply factual, the voice of a man laying out evidence rather than settling a score. "She took out loans she is still paying off today. Meanwhile, money that legally belonged to her was quietly redirected to fund the very night where she was just mocked in front of everyone for struggling." Presley's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I watched something shift across her face, somewhere between shock and the beginning of real understanding. "I'm not saying this to ruin a wedding," Ellison said. "I'm saying it because I refuse to build a family with people I love while pretending I didn't see what was done to someone inside it." Ren didn't create her situation. Her situation was created for her, quietly, over years, and then held against her tonight as a punchline in front of strangers. He turned toward Reese and me, and for the first time since he'd taken the microphone, his voice softened. "That little boy has spent his whole life watching his mother work harder than almost anyone I've ever met, with no support and very little thanks. Tonight, in front of everyone who laughed a few minutes ago, I want him to hear one thing clearly, so he never has to wonder about it later. His mother did absolutely nothing wrong." I don't remember deciding to cry. I just remember that I was, quietly, with Reese's hand still wrapped around mine. What happened next, I didn't expect at all. Presley, still standing on the stage, took a shaking breath and reached for the microphone Ellison was holding. He hesitated, then let her take it. "I need to say something," she said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "I didn't know about the account. I want that on record. But I did know other things, and I stayed quiet about them because it was easier." She looked at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. "Back when we were teenagers, before everything went through email, Mom told me you'd applied to a nursing program out of state, a better one, with a scholarship attached. She told me you changed your mind." "You didn't change your mind, did you?" I shook my head slowly. I had never once been told a scholarship existed. "The acceptance packet was mailed to the house," Presley said, more to the room now than to me, her voice cracking. "I found the envelope, still sealed, in a drawer years later, and I never said anything, because saying something meant admitting what kind of family we actually were." My mother tried to speak, something sharp and defensive rising in her throat, but the room was no longer interested in giving her the floor. A few guests were already reaching for coats. Ellison's parents sat rigid, quietly horrified, as the version of the family they had agreed to marry into rearranged itself in front of them. Nobody laughed anymore. Several guests stood up and left their tables entirely, unwilling to stay for whatever came next. My mother tried to speak again, something about context, something about how the money had helped the whole family in the long run, but her voice had lost the easy authority it always carried so effortlessly. Ellison didn't argue with her further. He simply took the microphone back gently, set it down on its stand, and walked across the room to kneel beside Reese. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "I heard you like the T-Rex best. Want to tell me why again? I think I forgot some of the details." Reese, still teary, managed a small, surprised laugh and started explaining, again, about tiny arms and powerful jaws, while the entire ballroom watched a grown man choose a 5-year-old's comfort over the wreckage of his own wedding reception. I found out later that Ellison had already consulted a colleague who specialized in financial recovery cases involving family trusts and custodial accounts, weeks before the wedding, once his office first flagged the irregularity. He told me afterward that he debated whether to bring it up privately instead, quietly, without an audience. But he said he kept picturing Table 14, kept picturing Reese sitting near the kitchen doors while cameras flashed around a family portrait he wasn't part of, and he decided some things needed witnesses in order to actually stick. Within a month, formal documentation was filed on my behalf. It wasn't framed as revenge in any of the paperwork. It was framed simply as restitution, money finally reaching the person it had always legally belonged to. My mother's attorney initially pushed back, arguing the funds had been used for family benefit and were therefore justified. That argument didn't hold up once the original custodial paperwork, naming me specifically as sole beneficiary, was entered into record. It took almost a year, working through the proper legal channels, but the account, plus accumulated interest, was eventually returned to me in full. I used part of it to pay off my remaining nursing school loans early, something I'd assumed would take another decade of careful budgeting. I used another part to move Reese and me into a small house with an actual backyard, the kind of yard he'd been asking about since he was old enough to form the request. I planted a small garden along the fence line that first spring, mostly tomatoes and something Reese insisted on calling dinosaur peppers, and I remember standing out there one evening thinking it was the first home that had ever felt entirely, uncomplicatedly mine. My mother and Presley didn't speak to me again for several months after the wedding. When my mother finally called, it wasn't an apology. It was a quiet, clipped request that I let it go, for the sake of the family, the same phrase she'd used my entire life whenever something inconvenient needed burying. I told her the family had already made its choice, out loud, at a microphone, in front of 300 witnesses, and that I no longer felt obligated to protect a version of peace that had only ever protected her. Ellison and Presley's marriage survived that night, though I know it was never quite the same afterward. Presley reached out to me on her own, eventually, without our mother anywhere in the conversation. It wasn't a full reconciliation, and I'm not sure it ever will be. But it was honest, and for the first time in our lives, honesty between us felt like more than we'd ever actually had. Reese is 7 now. He still talks about dinosaurs, though these days it's mostly about the flying ones, and he still asks, every so often, why a wedding once made his mom cry and made a grown man kneel down to talk to him about tiny arms and powerful jaws. I don't tell him all the details. He doesn't need to carry that yet. But I make sure he knows this much, in whatever small way a 7-year-old can hold it. Being underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you first isn't a flaw in you. Sometimes it's simply proof of how much work they were avoiding, and how much they needed you to stay quiet so no one ever noticed. I no longer sit at table 14 in my own life. I built a different table, smaller, with fewer chairs, but every single person at it actually wants me there. A few months after the account was settled, I ran into my mother at a pharmacy near her house, entirely by accident. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then she asked, quietly, if Reese was doing well in school. I told her he was. She nodded, and that was the entire conversation. I used to think a moment like that would feel triumphant. It didn't. It just felt like closing a door gently instead of slamming it, which somehow mattered more to me than I expected it to. I've thought a lot since that night about what it means to be believed. Not loved, necessarily, though that matters too, but believed. Ellison didn't fix my life. He didn't rescue me from anything I hadn't already survived on my own, working double shifts and raising Reese largely by myself for years before that wedding ever happened. What he did was simpler than that, and somehow rarer. He looked at evidence, took it seriously, and refused to let a room full of comfortable people decide that my struggle was a punchline instead of a fact worth investigating. That's the part one hopes stays with you longer than the drama of the microphone or the silence that followed it. Somewhere in your own life, there's probably a version of that custodial account, some quiet unfairness nobody ever bothered to check, because checking would have been inconvenient for someone comfortable. You don't need a wedding or 300 witnesses, or a dramatic reveal, to go looking for your own version of the truth. Sometimes you just need one person willing to actually look. So here's my question for you. If someone stood up for you the way Ellison did that night, in front of every person who ever doubted you, what's the one thing you'd want them to say? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Sophie Revenge, because tomorrow, another story of quiet, unstoppable justice is waiting for you.